Now, one limitation with some keyboards like this microKORG is the number of notes they can play back simultaneously. Now this one has a limit of 4 notes at best, sometimes only 2 depending on the chosen program. And here's an example with factory preset A11, and as soon as you go beyond the limit, the original notes cut out. Now, this may not be an issue with you, but if it is, one solution is to sample the sound and make use of the sampler's ability to play more notes simultaneously. And this demo uses an EMU E5000 hardware sampler, but any other hard or soft sampler will do. Now, if you've tried sampling before, you'll know how tedious it can be to capture large numbers of notes. This is even worse if you want to capture different velocities for each sample. There are commercial products available which automate everything, but this is at a price. So we'll be using a simple free tool just for generating the MIDI notes. And this allows you to concentrate on driving the sampler without worrying too much about which note is next and how hard to press it. Now the output here connects to the target device to be sampled, in this case the microKORG, and this triggers each note as required. Now this secondary output can be used to send the MIDI output to the sampler if it's got the capability of auto-naming samples. Now the EMU has this capability, but the netbook I'm running the program on only has a single MIDI port. So I'm using an external MIDI splitter to send the output to both the microKORG and the sampler. Now if you've seen the sample aid audition video, you'll be familiar with most of these controls as they are duplicated in both the sample and audition sections. This section defines the sequence of note pitches and velocities you want to sample. You can start from any note within the 10 octave MIDI range, go up by as many steps as you like, these are semitones, and finish at, again, whatever note you like. This number here shows you the total number of steps from the first to the last note. You can also step through different velocities. Again, this is the start value, which can be any value from 1 to 127. This is the step number and the final value here. So this example is showing us that there's 3 steps from 47 to 127 in steps of 40. Now if you only want to sample notes at the maximum velocity, for example, if you set these to maximum, there's just 1 step. Now the note on time is defined by this drop down box. So the total number of steps times the note on time gives you this value here, which is the total sample time required. And the calculator section here allows you to put in values for your particular sampler, and the program will estimate how much sampler memory you need. You can play around with all these values and assess how they affect the total sample time and memory you require. The more samples you take, the better, but this requires more time and more sample memory. This EMU sampler has a limit of 128 megabytes. The manual section here allows you to move around the steps within the sequence, and the note button outputs the current note. You can semi-automate the process by just clicking the step button, or use the space bar if it's more convenient. And as you can see, this outputs the note and moves to the next step. Now this gives you all the time you need to operate the sampler. Now the play button here automates the whole process by stepping through the complete sequence, waiting a specified time between each note, which you define by this box. Now if you tweak this delay to match the time you need to operate the sampler, the whole process is reduced to a smaller time as possible, and the only real problem then is staying awake. Right, we'll try a little rehearsal. The note on time is set to 1 second, and the note off time is also a second. We'll click play here. And you can see the current note stepping through the values that we've defined earlier. Now, any time you can click abort, and that will stop the sequence and leave the current step as it was. Click play again, and it carries on from that point. Right, we're ready to start sampling on the EMU. Now, the advice is to name the preset first before you start sampling, and the name you use will then be a prefix for all the sample names. So we'll click preset manage, name, and in this case we're going to try the microKORG A11 preset. So we'll name it MK A11. Now, because we fed the MIDI output from the sample aid program into the sampler, it will know which note has been generated, and it will also add that note name to the sample name. Right, we're ready to sample. We press new sample. Now, if I click the note button on the sample aid program, you can use this to set your recording levels. Now, there's one issue I've not mentioned yet, and that's to do with looping samples. Now, if you're trying to save memory, looping is very convenient, but it's also quite tricky to do without it sounding too artificial. You could take the decision, if you've got enough memory, to just sample notes that are long enough to correspond to whatever type of music you're playing. If you want long 20-second drone sounds and you don't use looping, that means you need to sample 20 seconds for each note. Now, if the sounds you're sampling are loopable and you're confident at doing looping, then by all means go ahead. In this demo we'll not bother with looping. We'll say the longest note is 5 seconds. So I'll set that on the sample aid program. That means when we play the thing back, we can hold a note for 5 seconds before it cuts out. Right, let's define what we want to sample for this demo. We'll do every note from C1 to C3. So we want to put the step size down to 1, and it immediately shows us there's going to be 25 steps. We'll leave the velocity at maximum, so it'll just be 1 step, which means the total number of notes, the total number of pitch velocity combinations is 25. And if we sample 5-second notes, this is the estimate of how much memory we'll need for 25 samples. Okay, we'll reset back to the beginning of the sequence. Right, we want to automate this eventually, so we'll put in a rough guess for the amount of time we need to fiddle with the sampler. So we'll alter this note off time, 15 seconds say. We can adjust it later on. So that means the note will sound for 5 seconds, and then it will go off for 15 seconds, and then the next note will come on. Right, we're back on the sampler now. We need to set up some values on here. The length of the sample. Now, our note on from the sample aid tool is 5 seconds, so it needs to be at least 5. And if we've got any decay on the note, any reverb or anything like that, they need to make it longer. So we'll put in 7 seconds, and if we get the sampler to truncate, it doesn't matter if we overestimate. The only other thing on the EMU is this one, the input. You can set to both left or right, and we're doing stereo sampling, so we're set to both, and that's about it. Right, we'll just do a manual record for now, because there's some other settings on the sampler we need to check. Once you've set them, it will remember them for the rest of the session. So we'll press ARM, and then I'll click the note button on sample aid. So that's just sent one note and stops. Now the sampler's gone into this screen to allow us to keep the recording or dispose of it, or to place it. And the various options here allow me to pre-process the sample, and once you've set these, it will remember them for the rest of the session. So I want to truncate both the start and the end of the sample. I don't want to normalize because I want to leave the volumes, the relative volumes, correct for each note, and I don't want to loop. The system will try, if you set this on, it will try and automatically pick a suitable loop point, but it's not guaranteed to be perfect. And as we discussed before, we're not going to bother looping in this demo. Now, various other things. This original key, or origin key, is the note value detected from the MIDI signal coming into the sampler. Now it uses that information to append to the name of the sample. Now if you don't have a MIDI input to this particular sampler, then it won't be able to automatically name the sample, and you'll have to do it manually. The other thing to check if you've got an EMU is this target down here, and this says preset 0, and it gives the name of the preset just for confirmation. So if you had several presets, you can cycle through them, pick the preset to which you want to assign the sample. So once you've got all that, you don't need to worry about it again, and you will normally press the place button. So we'll just say dispose for now. Press ARM, and we'll click play now on the sample aid tool. Now this will start all the notes being played one by one, all hands free. So all we have to do is press the buttons on the sampler. There's the first one. Sample's finished. I press place and ARM. Now as long as I do that within the time period allocated, sample aid will play the next tone. Now once you get a bit of practice, you can tweak that delay time so you're not sat here waiting for each note to come along. There's a countdown timer on the screen just to give you an idea of how much time you've got left. I'll just look at that now. I'll do place, ARM, and it's saying I've got the next notes in 7 seconds. So I could reduce that 15-second delay by, say, 6, give me a bit of float. So we'll do that. I'll press abort on sample aid, which stops it generating the next note. I'll place this particular one that's come through now. Right, I'll go back to sample aid and I'll change the 15-second delay. I'm going to knock 6 seconds off it, which means I want 9 seconds. Okay, I can't show you this, I haven't moved the camera, but it's currently set to note E, which is the next one to be played, so I don't need to touch that. I can just click play and it will carry on. So we need to arm the sampler, and now click play. And replace, arm. There's less of a delay now. Now if we take a look at the samples so far, sample manage, start from sample 1, and you can see now the name that the EMU has given to it is the prefix with MK microKORG A11, and it's added the note that came in that was used to sample, so that was C1. The next sample is C#1, the D, D-sharp, etc. And if we go to the preset edit, and it shows you the samples have been added automatically to the voice of this preset. So sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, etc. Now if you're sampling different velocities as well, you can split the velocities and pitches onto different voices to make it easier to handle later on. But that's outside the scope of this demo. Here's the final preset now with all the 25 samples. Go to preset edit, These are all the samples here. Right, C1 to C3. Right, don't forget to save this if you've got a disk attached, otherwise you'll lose everything. So save, select your folder, disk folder and bank, and click OK. It's asking me to confirm the name. I've already saved this once, so the name's already set. Click OK, and off it goes. Okay, so what does it sound like as it stands? I'll just press a couple of keys. Now you can do all sorts of tricks once you've got it onto the sampler. We'll just add a bit of decay to the note. So on the EMU we go to Preset, Edit, and then Edit Voice. And here we can tweak amplifier settings, and this one here, the standard ADSR, although in this one it's 2 A's, 2 D's and 2 R's. So we'll tweak the release 1 setting. Right, now let's see if we've improved the number of notes we can play. Now don't forget we've not used looping, so the note will cut out after 5 seconds. Okay, but that's a compromise you have to make. If you want to increase that, you either sample longer notes or you try and loop the sample.